So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful summer Thursday, unless you're joining us from Australia. Welcome to KanConf 2, our second event of the mini series. My name is Veronica, and it's my honor and privilege to be your MC. So, where is everyone joining us from? We have 120 people now. Fun fact, at KanConf 1, we had 45 countries represented. I mean, how amazing is that? Let's see, where are people joining us? From Spain, United States, Brazil, Poland, Chicago, Austria, Virginia. Oh my God, India, just, yep, lots of countries. Amazing. I love it. I'm generally extremely impressed that so many of you went out of your way to be here with us, waking up very early or staying up late or after a long day at work. But you know what they say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So if you'd like to grab a glass of your favorite drink, sit back and learn some really cool and practical facts about Lean and Kanban, I won't tell a soul, I promise. Special thanks to PMI Chapter Bulgaria for supporting this event by providing PDUs to chapter members in attendance. You can claim your PDUs using the link we are about to post in the chat right now. I want to take this opportunity, and this is very important, to say that the company's team and I are truly appreciative of the fact that you're joining us today. All of you are so amazing, audience, panelists. Merely by being here, you add to the momentum of the movement that we've started with the KanConf series, namely to create a community of like-minded professionals who are eager to exchange ideas, knowledge, and experience to better themselves, their clients, their business. Today, you're contributing to discussions that are rarely being had at this level, if ever, and stirring up conversations that could echo in many business meetings in the near and distant future. We at Kanban are passionate about providing value to you. And since most of you are already very knowledgeable and experienced, it's not easy to impress you. This is why we will always invite the absolute leaders in the field who have decades of tried and tested knowledge and experience. We bring you award-winning authors, mentors, teachers, and consultants who support incredible companies that we've all heard of. So today we have Andrea Haase, an expert in lean management and continuous improvement for Rolls-Royce and co-founder of Holia, where she supports customers in realizing holistic concepts that address both strategy and management methods and resilience. She's led over 500 implementations of methodologies like Kanban, Lean and Scaled Agile and product development, engineering, manufacturing, and many others. Next up, we have Erasto Meneses, who is the head of Lean Digital Transformation at the Lean Institute, Brazil. Graduated Kaizen specialist from the University of Toyota and learning at Toyota Financial Services, Erasto took his knowledge about TPS and Toyota Way to help and improve companies such as Procter & Gamble, Dell Computers, I mean, wow, and many other big names. For over 15 years, he implements lean philosophy and agile in the areas of service and digital. And last but not least, we have Mr. Nigel Thurlow, an internationally recognized, an internationally recognized expert in the Toyota production system and the Toyota Way, as well as lean thinking, agile, scrum, and complexity concepts. He is the creator of the World Agility Forum and the co-creator of the Flow system. It's no coincidence Forbes named him in the top 10 authors for his work as co-author of the book on the Flow system. I see little thumbs up and claps going up my screen. So yes, you guys see awesome people that we're bringing you. I told you. So what is it about Toyota that is so special? I'm glad you asked. Lean manufacturing is synonymous with the Toyota production system, or TPS, and this manufacturing philosophy enabled Toyota to effectively conquer the global automobile market by reducing waste and improving quality. But no spoilers, I will let Nigel tell you the story, and Erasto. So today we'll talk about deep lean thinking and lean fundamentals, agile versus lean, virtues of Kanban, value stream mapping, and so on. And before I pass the mic to Nigel, I want to ask all of you to direct your attention to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There you will see all of our pre-submitted questions. Thank you for submitting those upon registration. Please use the upvote feature to select which questions are most interesting to you. We will focus on those that have the most votes because we just can't cover all of them, unfortunately. We have around 40 questions submitted. So this will be a Lean Coffee style type of Q&A. If you have additional questions, please don't put them in the chat. Use the Q&A button to submit them, or else it's likely we will miss them. The recording will be made available to you later on, so keep an eye out on your emails, and we will have some extra thank you gifts in there, so make sure you don't miss them. And Nigel, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Veronica, and I appreciate everybody being here. I was just looking at some of the locations: Beirut in the Lebanon, Lagos, Nigeria, Colombia, obviously friends from LEI in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I've been lucky enough to visit. And Trinidad and Tobago and a bunch of others, and people just down the road from me in Frisco, Texas, who I know very well. So I'm really, really pleased everybody's come. I was asked to do a little bit about my history and a bit about my history in Toyota and how I got to be where I am now, doing the things I am. So I'm going to present a few slides. We're going to have a Menti quiz. So if those out there don't know what Mentimeter are, make sure you've got a cell phone or something similar around with you. And I keep going pale when I put my hands up, so I'm going to stop doing that. That's a lighting thing. I'm going to share with you a little bit of my journey and a little bit of things, and we'll get a little bit into this thing called Kanban a bit later on, and I'll give you some thoughts that Andrea and Erasto will disagree with vehemently, and will make for great debate and panel questions. And I've seen some of the panel questions as well, which looks really good. Veronica, you're going to have to enable screen sharing for me because that bit isn't working.
Oh, absolutely.
Make me a co-host, and then I can share some wonderful ideas and thoughts with the audience. So
there we go.
Let's see if that works. Oh, something moved on my screen. There we go. So I'm going to share my desktop too. That will work. Okay, so now I can see everybody, which was the idea, and I can also see what I'm talking to you all about. There we go. So this is a little bit about me. I'm not going to go into the details that's on that slide. It's just there's a QR code. If you want to scan it, it'll take you to lots of things about me. But I thought I'd start with a little bit of history of me and my sort of journey in Toyota. So back in 2005, I sort of wandered into this thing called TME, that's Toyota Motor Europe. I spent several years there being trained by the best of the best in the automotive manufacturing application of the Toyota production system. This wasn't specifically knowledge work, but I was in knowledge work departments, but focusing on the manufacturing plants. So I learned from some of the best. I've trained about 8,500 people in the last few years, about 4,500 of those across the Toyota landscape in bringing together the lean and the agile worlds. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. In 2005, I ended up in North America. My wife's American, hence the reason I live in the USA. I live in Texas. And of course, Toyota's headquarters are here now. But prior to that, I started doing some work in California with them. And I actually wandered back into Toyota when I was doing some work with Jeff Sutherland, you know, of Scrum fame. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. And of course, in 2017, I went and joined Toyota Connected and left there just before the end of 2019 to pursue work on the flow system. And then the pandemic came. So one of the best decisions I'd not made for some time. So that's a little bit about my history. But I also have worked in other places, not just Toyota. And I was asked to give a bit of history. So I went digging out a few of my photographs, and it actually gave me a lot of great memories. These are just a few of them I threw on a slide just to share with you. So, you know, I've done some work in manufacturing other than Toyota, and this is a industrial heat and ventilation and air conditioning company known as Cambridge Air now, and I spent a lot of time with them, and we implemented agile techniques, Kanban and Scrum on the production floor beyond the actual manufacturing lines. The US Navy came to talk to me for reasons I'll never understand. When I was at Toyota Connected, they seemed to think there was some good ideas we're having. The fun guys over on the top right, this was 3M medical devices. And then there's lots of post-it notes, as you see. The one in the middle, I thought I'd share this. This is Kanban in bows that I set up. So I just thought I'd show you that since it's a Kanban thing. General Electric down on the bottom left. And then in the middle, we've got the Dallas Police Department. I actually got the head of sort of drug enforcement using Kanban in his offices in Dallas Police Department, and then more post-it notes in a different part of 3M. And because of this, I've met some really cool people. These are just a few of them I threw out from some of my photos. This is Jez Humble. So if you're somebody into DevOps and that type of thing, then Jez Humble should be well known to you. If you know about the Dallas Cowboys, which I knew nothing about before moving to Texas, that's Roger Starbuck. Apparently he's really famous. I knew nothing about this when he came to a class I was teaching. These two Japanese gentlemen here, that's Professor Nanaka and his friend Professor Takeichi. They're the people who wrote the new product development game. So I was lucky enough to do some stuff in Japan when I was out there and met them both there. You'll see our friend John Shook down the bottom here, just here. This is when I was in Brazil with the LEI in Brazil. So shout out to the folks there. My friend Dave Snowden and my friend Dirk van Gooberg, and Dirk's a world expert in value stream mapping. Dave Snowden should need no introduction. He's the world expert in complexity. This is when we were in Toyota doing some cool stuff together. And myself and Steve Denning talking about fake agile. Then I spent a lot of time with my friend Ritsuo Shingo. His father is Shigeo Shingo. If you know some of the techniques from the Toyota production system, they came from his father. And Ritsuo Shingo himself was a Toyota veteran for 40 years and finished his career as the president of Toyota China. And he spent some time with me at Toyota Connected, helping some of my team. And apparently I wrote a book somewhere along this journey as well, condensing some of my thoughts with my co-authors there, Brian on the left, John on the right. John's a real professor. I just pretend to be clever. So there's a little bit about my history. Where did my interest in this agile thing come along if I'd done this lean journey? Well, this was Akio Toyoda. He's the president of Toyota. He's the great grandson of the original founder and the grandson of the founder of the car company. And he started to talk about how our world was changing and we needed to transition Toyota more to a mobility company from just a automobile company. Now, Toyota do many things, but predominantly they're known for their car manufacturing. And he wanted to move into new ways of working and ways of accelerating some of the things they did. And this is where the agile story starts to enter Toyota. But before we do that, I want to ask you a little question. I'm going to do, well, I clear my throat and have a drink of water. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to use Menti to do this. Now, if the technology works, you guys should now see the Mentimeter screen, as long as everybody sees that. So if you can go to menti.com and enter the code you see on screen, which is, I have to look this way now, 9878 9592. If you can enter that code and put in the code for that, so menti.com, enter the code, and then there's a question it's asking you. Describe lean. So how would you describe lean, or lean thinking if you prefer? How would you describe lean? Now, the results are hidden on purpose because dot voting and anonymous questions don't work if the answers aren't anonymous. I will reveal the answers shortly, but just to get a bit of a feedback from you, the audience, how would you describe lean? I know there's some raised hands. I'll let Veronica deal with raised hands and see if there's anything there that people need help on. But we've got 5 responses so far. See if we can get a few more. We have a huge number of participants, about 170 participants that I see. Okay, 12 so far, 13. Now, I guarantee Erasto and a few of his colleagues are typing in things there rapidly now. But let's see if we can get a few more responses. Good, we're getting quite a few. And then I will have a look at what some of you are describing as lean, because I thought I would take this question because I thought this was going to be quite interesting. Let's have a look at what some of you are answering now. No waste, removing waste, a way of life. I like this one a lot. Minimum input with maximum output. I like value more than output, but I get the idea. the Toyota production system. Others might disagree with you there. This whole lean and TPS battle. Eliminate waste continuously, customer value first, the minimum amount of work needed for a viable solution. Sounds very agile, that's good. Focus on the essentials, limit waste and overhead. Continuous improvement done with people we love. Isn't that nice? Look at that. Make the best use of resources, learn how to think actually, and lots of other things along those lines. Okay, some great answers. I appreciate you all participating in that. The reason I ask you that is because the purpose of Lean, described by its predominant creator, now e.g. Toyota, empowered Taiichi Ohno to go forward and do the things they needed to do with the Toyota production system, and e.g. Toyota, one of the founding family members, was instrumental in enabling this to happen. But Ohno describes it in this book as the fundamental doctrine is being the total elimination of waste. But this word waste confuses people, so I thought I'd address that. So waste, the Japanese word everybody uses, is muda. People love to run around shouting Japanese words like kaizen and muda and jidoka, thinking they mean cool things, makes them sound cool. And I used to do it a lot. But what muda actually means is things are senseless or meaningless, uselessness or futility. And it's described as the clumsiness and the lack of professionalism, which leads to unnecessary costs. So we're talking about, when we talk about waste, we mean non-value added activity. So the purpose of the Toyota production system initially was to eliminate things that didn't add value, to remove the cost of doing work, predominantly because Toyota didn't have the money to compete with the people in the West, predominantly America at that time, following the Second World War and the recovery of the Japanese economy. Now, clever people, not me, but other clever people, have decided that muda, or non-value added activity, is in two categories. And I'm going to caution you here because some people use the term necessary waste, which is absolutely the wrong term to use. You should never describe something that's unnecessary as necessary. Unavoidable maybe, or currently essential is probably some of the things that you could potentially describe it at. So type 1 muda, or non-value added activity that's in type 1 category, is some of the things you see on screen: unnecessary contracts, bureaucracy, red tape, doing things because we've always done them, endless review processes, employees that aren't empowered. Now, these things, for these to be got rid of, business conditions or technology needs to change. These are things we cannot yet avoid, but we would desire to avoid them. They're not necessary, they're unnecessary, but unavoidable. And it's a really important distinction. Everything else, just stop doing it. If it doesn't make sense, please stop doing it. Type 2 muda is any non-value added tasks which can be eliminated immediately. So let's stop doing that. Let's talk about what the Toyota production system is. Here you see e.g. Toyota and Taiichi Ohno, the proponents and the main protagonists that helped bring the vision of Sakichi Toyoda and Kiichiro Toyoda to life. Sakichi was the guy who started with the weaving looms. He died before the car company became a reality, but his son, Kiichiro Toyoda, was the person who brought the car company into being and is the person who is responsible for this whole thing called just in time, which is the reason we have this thing called Kanban, apparently. And so we have the Toyota production system, two key pillars of Jidoka and just in time. Jidoka is really about giving machines some intelligence and building in quality. People will debate the meaning until the end of time, but that's basically how I was taught. And then just in time, about making sure we only build and make what we need when we need it in the time we need it, underpinned by three key principles. And I did see one of the principles in one of the questions that might get voted up, customer first being that primary principle of everything Toyota does. And this is how it all started with Sakichi Toyoda and the Type G weaving loom in 1924. This is where the concept of machines having some built-in intelligence to make decisions. This was DevOps in 1924, by the way, and I can sustain that in our conversations afterwards. Then a few years later, these two professors from MIT went off and studied the automotive business, excuse me, and studied Toyota. And in this book, The Machine That Changed the World, they coined the word lean to describe what they'd seen at Toyota. So the birth of lean, this thing we call lean, was the birth of the word to describe it came in the book The Machine That Changed the World, and then the follow-up book Lean Thinking. I'd maintain lean thinking was around for many, many years before these folks came up with that word, but that's why it's called lean. And we have our friends from LEI who can talk about that, no doubt, when we start to discuss things. Essentially, what Ono was trying to do was improve flow efficiency, which is not surprising since I study flow nowadays. And he says, all we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us the order to the point when they give us the cash, or we collect the cash. And are we reducing the timeline by reducing non-value adding waste in between? Focus on flow efficiency, stop focusing on moving the deck chairs on the Titanic by reorganizing your organization. Ultimately, you want a great organization, but you need flow. Then came the Toyota Way, 2001, not written by Jeff Leiker, despite what everybody thinks. Jeff wrote the book called The Toyota Way, but The Toyota Way was written by people in Toyota, overseen by Mr. Cho, who was the chairman of the company at the time. He's still alive in Japan, retired, but still is a overseeing light in the Toyota Way. Toyota Way is basically 2 pillars: continuous improvement, respect for people, 5 values, and 14 principles. Which is interesting because that thing that Alistair talked about in the last session is called the Agile Manifesto, and that's just a philosophy made up of 4 values and 12 principles. So the Toyota Way is Toyota's philosophy, and it's described in those words in the document, and the Agile Manifesto is just a philosophy, lots of methods and tools to live by the philosophy. It's just a philosophy, folks. I know you'll disagree with me. So I started talking a few years ago about why lean wasn't enough and why we needed to add in some agile thinking to the way that Toyota's production system worked. And if you want to see how all that started, this was it. This was the very first meeting with me at the time as a consultant for Jeff Sutherland at Toyota's headquarters in North America, with the first ever Post-it notes that we used to talk about bringing in agile ways of working into Toyota. And I remember Kanban on the manufacturing line isn't an agile way of working. It's a different thing. We'll get there though, don't worry. This is the very first training course we did. I thought it was a great picture, so I thought I'd show it. We blew up lots of balloons and did all the silly games that everybody else does when we teach Scrum. And this was the first backlog that was ever built. This was in California. This was the first team that were doing a Microsoft migration, the rollout of Microsoft's 365 product suite across the company. And this was the team building their very first backlog on that. And my team, everybody learned TPS. So everybody that was working in agile circles went and learned TPS. This is the official Toyota production system training. Yes, you build model cars, and that's Kanban training that's happening on the tables right now. Looks a bit different to a board full of Post-it notes. So a bit faster. So let's link these two worlds together and tell you how I brought these two together. Now I'm fast forwarding a massive story here over many years. But on the left, you've got plan, do, check, act, something a lot of people are familiar with in the lean world or in the Toyota world. On the right, you've got Scrum, this agile thing. And for those folks that don't realize, Scrum contains Kanban. I know you'll argue with me, but it does contain Kanban. To do, doing, and done, hello, that's a Kanban board. So basically, PDCA on the left, Scrum on the right, that's just PDCA with some discipline and some defined roles. Once people started to realize that in Toyota, it was really easy. And that led us to create something called Scrum the Toyota Way, where we saw TPS or lean thinking as building the product right, building in quality, eliminating waste, building the product right. We then saw Agile adding in the notion of building the right product. Nobody will argue that Tesla don't build the right product. They sell like hotcakes. There's obsessive fans around the Tesla company, but I'm not sure they build the best quality product. So they build the right product and build it in the right way. When we added in Scrum and other tools, That was just to give us a planning system, because Scrum is a planning system. It's a planning cadence as described by Ken Schwaber, and it has a built-in feedback loop based on empirical thinking or empiricism. So you can be lean without being agile, and you can be agile without being lean. You can build great products that nobody wants to buy, or you can build, you can build really high quality products that nobody wants to buy. You can build great products that just aren't very good. Ideally, you want to be both of these. And my key phrase around this is, if you were, I have a spinning ball of death here, Veronica, so you may have to just pause for a minute. But my sort of watchword when I'm talking about this is, if you want to be agile, then first get lean. Oh, there you go. So if you want to be agile, first get lean. So if you start trying to use some of these agile techniques without actually understanding the fundamental principles on which they're based, you'll find it very difficult. So when we segue into Kanban, so simply stated, lean is optimized for value and quality. Agile, from my perspective, is make faster decisions so you can execute on them faster. A couple of photos I put in for a bit of fun. This was Toyota Connected when I was there, and just to show you the DNA of Toyota, this is a facsimile of the weaving loom. You don't actually see it, but in the middle of this red thread, there's actually the shuttle that goes through on the weaving loom as a facsimile, as a memory to how the company started. But of course, it's very different internally to how Toyota was when it started, and this was one of the events in Toyota Connected. I just wanted, before we talk about Kanban, which is how I'm going to finish what I'm talking to you about, I wanted to just throw one of these Japanese words out there that people always use, this thing called Kaizen. Kaizen does not mean continuous improvement. I know it's a shock for a lot of you, and people are throwing things at the screen now, but Kaizen doesn't literally translate to continuous improvement. The literal translation is change good, if you just take the words. But what it actually means is to keep questioning your assumptions while always searching for a new approach to solve a problem. And the sort of word Kai breaks down as to make something new, find a new approach. It's about thriving for disruption, about constantly challenging the quality of your thinking. So I wanted to leave you with that. Let's talk about Kanban. I think I've got just enough time. That's Kanban. What you're looking at there is Kanban. So the word literally means billboard or signboard in Japanese. And to most people in Japan, that's what it means. If you go to a person in the street and go, show me a Kanban board, they'll point at a big sign or something in the street with neon on it, or advertising, DIY or something. This is a real Kanban card as in used in Toyota. This describes all the things that are necessary as the vehicle progresses down the production line. This is what Walmart looked like in 2020 when I took a picture there when the pandemic kicked in. The first thing is Kanban is not a framework and it's not a methodology. Despite what Messrs. Anderson and Co. and others will tell you, they created a methodology which they called Kanban. But Kanban is not a methodology. They have a methodology which they might as well call it, I don't know, elephant or something, because it basically is a methodology that uses a board. But it's not Kanban as intended by the original creators, which is a pull system to ensure that work and materials are only delivered where they are needed, when they're needed, or that people only do work when they need to do work. And this was one of the slides I put on LinkedIn recently that caused all sorts of interesting conversations. And can't wait for Andrea to take me apart in all this. So we'll see. So Kanban is a basic pull system. What that means is we've got a bunch of things in knowledge work, and I'm talking about in a knowledge work context now. We have a bunch of things in our intake that somebody has dutifully prioritized. The idea is that the first step in the process has capacity. So they will pull a piece of work into their area and start working on it because they have capacity. When they've completed, the work can be pulled by the next step and so on until we get the piece of work completed. The idea being that we don't take work until we have capacity to take work or do work. And then you've got these things we start implementing called work in progress limits, or work in process, sometimes it's known, to prevent us from taking too much work into a process step that we don't have the capacity to do. The problem being, as my computer misbehaves again, the problem being is, where do you put those work in progress or process limits? Now, most people will put those, go back one, they'll put those work in progress limits on the actual where the work is being done. That is wrong, is incorrect. It's against Little's law and a bunch of other things. Where you should actually do is place your work in process limits in the queues, not where the work is actually being done. So I thought I'd throw that out there for us to have a conversation about. And then we asked about value stream mapping, work as imagined versus work as done. My question to a lot of executives is, do you know how you do what you do? You know what you do and you know why you do it. Do you know how it gets done? I can tell you the people doing the work knows how it gets done, but the people making decisions probably don't. Another Japanese word for you, miyaruka, means visual control, or visual control that's useful. There are 4 types of visual control. Some of them you'll be familiar with, like IKEA plans and Kanban boards to help you plan. But the rules around this is it should be visible from wherever it needs to be seen, whenever it needs to be seen, and it should contain whatever information is valuable. Because work is across the organization. Work is not isolated to one department. So what tends to happen is you'll run in and start doing your lean or your agile optimization, and you'll throw a Kanban board at some teams who are doing some work, but you forget about all these folks. And so the problem is that you create what Deming called a sub-optimization, because a value stream contains all the people, machines, technology, and skills needed to create the end-to-end product delivery. So if you go and optimize here with a few agile or lean tools and throw some Kanban or Scrum or something else in here, what's happening in the rest of this value stream here? What about your compliance, your governance, procurement, legal, and all those other processes? So in Toyota, what we're trying to do is look for something known as stagnation. I won't dig into this too deeply because of time, but what we're trying to do is to identify processes that are overwhelmed. I won't even go into the theory of constraints here because of my posts on LinkedIn recently, but what we're trying to do is to look at constraints in the system. And many of those constraints may manifest themselves as bottlenecks. Now, the opposite of flow is stagnation. If you look it up on Google, the opposite of flow is stagnation. So what we're trying to do is to identify bottlenecks. Here's a simple Kanban board with some columns on it, with some potential activities that aren't software development related. And here you can quickly identify the bottlenecks. Where should we be limiting WIP, or where should we be focusing improvement opportunities to improve throughput in some of these processes? I want to finish this off by talking about where time goes, because when people set up these boards, and I have a warning here, and again, I'm really interested to what Andrea says about this in her experience. If you're using lean metrics, lean measures, cycle time, lead time, words like that, you're in a complex work environment. I would argue the work is not complex. The work might be difficult, might be complicated, but it's not truly complex, because you can only use predictive measures in a predictable environment. You can't use predictable or predictive measures in an unpredictable environment. So when people say they're doing complex work and then they're applying Kanban, I would argue the toss with them a little bit. So here's your idea. You put an item in the intake, write the date and time on it. The time it takes from that item to reach the done column is what we call the customer lead time. The time it takes from the customer making the request to the customer receiving the value. Once it moves to the first step in the process, write the date and time on it, because now you're measuring how long it takes to deliver that piece of value, the product, the item, whatever it is. And that may be, there may be a differentiation between when the customer requested it and when you started working on it. Now, when you start actually doing value-added work, start measuring the actual time it takes until the value-added work is completed. That's what we might call the product cycle time. The cycle time is the time to create one item of value. And then start measuring the interim process, what I call I've got hearts going up the screen here. So start measuring process times, process cycle times, and waiting times at each of the intermediate steps. I'll tell you a little bit about why, and then I will finish my my monologue here. If I've lost my mouse here, what happened here? Give me a second. My computer froze my end, Veronica. I'm having tech issues here.
Your computer can't take it. You
That's better.
Just can't take it.
So we're getting there. So some of the things I suggest you measure, things like process time, the time taken for a process step to be completed, value creating time, the actual time in the work you're doing that's actually creating value. Waiting time is a no-brainer. The cycle time, the time taken to complete one item. Each time you produce something, one user story, one backlog item, one piece of value. The takt time, if you're using Kanban and don't know what takt time is, stop using Kanban and please go learn what takt time is. Takt time is helping you determine how long you have to work on an item when you have many items to work on to meet the customer's expected delivery. So if you've got 40 contracts to work on in a 40-hour week, the average time per contract is 1 hour. Bless you. And that's takt time. Now, my computer didn't break itself. We'll wait for it to catch up. The other things I want to just mention to you briefly is that when people start to talk about lead time, what they talk about is often just one measure of lead time. I break that down, as you saw on the previous slide, and my computer will eventually work. I'm sorry about the tech challenges here. There you go. What I want to talk to you about is lead time is often seen as the total time to deliver the work through the whole process. And in a lot of lean companies, they start to conflate these terms. I separate them out because I use sort of notations from what's called factory physics into product lead time, the total time to deliver the work through the whole process to the point of shipping, and then customer lead time, which is the time taken in addition to ship the value to the customer so they can receive it and start to consume the value. If you don't differentiate these two, you may have internal metrics that say you're performing really well, but your customer's telling you you're not performing well at all. And then finally, this one, I did a whole post about this the other day, which invited all sorts of comments, throughput. Throughput's really simple. How many things can you make in a given amount of time? How many iPhones can you produce in 1 hour? How many user stories can you do in one sprint? That's the efficiency of your process in producing things. It's really important to define that. Now, the theory of constraints has a different explanation, similar meaning, different explanation. Lean manufacturing has a different explanation than does knowledge work. I finally my computer's not behaving at all, so I apologize for this. So I'll try and stop the screen share in a moment. I just wanted to finish off by giving you a couple of tips for Kanban in actual use. And I wanted to give you a couple, as I say, my computer will catch up. I apologize for the tech gremlins here, Veronica. But I had a couple of photographs I wanted to show you, which I will get to now. I'm going to do this now. I wanted to show you a couple of things that I think would be interesting. This was Kanban being used at Toyota Financial Services after we started Toyota Financial Services using some of these agile techniques. As you'll see, it's all analog. Now they're using digital tools as well, but they started in an analog way, using this as a sort of a higher level, a meta level. And you can see some of the terminology on there. And I wanted to show you, this is how it all started. So this is where it all started, the same teams. The bottom, you've got executives sorting, talking C-suite executives sorting Post-it notes. Then we've got people using techniques called story mapping, a technique from a guy called Jeff Patton, and starting to sort out backlogs. And here's a couple of controversial things for you to throw into the conversation before I wrap this up. Don't use expedite lanes. Expedites are evil, shouldn't exist, should be banned, should be deleted from all agile lifecycle management tools. Because if you have a process that's been heavily refined and optimized and is working beautifully, what do you think expedite does? I'll leave that as a question for the panel. And then we've got class of service swim lanes. My head explodes. Now we've got multiple lanes. And, hello, folks. If you've got one team, what do I work on? What do I pull? Where's my, I don't know what to pull from. This is just squeaky wheel prioritization. This is whoever's shouting loudest gets the work. So there's a thing to throw out there for you. Final slides. My boss said to me, he worked for Accio, reports to Accio. He says, what's the purpose of visual management? He says the visual workplace needs to answer two questions. What do I need to know to do my work? What do I need to share externally about my work? So is it visualization or utilization? Visualization is just making things visible for making things visible's sake. Utilization is actually showing what's happening, where we are, and enabling us to make decisions. And I threw up a slide online saying, is it Kanban or Andon? And I got all the lean purists telling me Andon is just a cord you pull with a red light that comes on. I went, no, it's not. Please read the original literature. Andon is about visual control. It's a visual management system. So Kanban is a signaling system for just-in-time production, work or inventory. That's utilization, pulling when you've got capacity. And Andon is visualizing the current status and giving you highlights and warnings about conditions that may be there. For instance, your queues are overflowing, your WIP limits are ineffective. That's the technical gremlins out of the way. I'm going to stop presenting slides before I get into more trouble here. Veronica, I went really quickly, but I wanted to include a lot of ideas for us to talk about. I'm going to hand this back to you and say thank you.
Thank you. I mean, wow, it's wow. I think people in the chat are just, you could see by their comments, everyone really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you. We're super eager to dive into our Q&A. Just not a heads up, but a little note. We've started a networking train. So everyone is sharing their LinkedIn links in the chat. Keep going. I mean, this is awesome. Would love to connect with all of you. We have posted, we have 43 questions in the Q&A. So, we better get started. And I will begin with the very first one. We are going to time these, so I apologize in advance. If I have to cut someone off, I don't want to, but for the sake of time. And also, don't forget to follow Companies on LinkedIn as well, so that you never miss a KanConf again. All right, first question. How/when to go from doing, done to value stream mapping? And this is something we discussed before we started. So I know this is, Erasto is just cheering for this question. So let's do it.
Yes, do you mind if I start with this question, guys?
Of course.
Okay, let me take this question, guys, because particularly this question caught my attention. For the simplicity of the question and the complexity of the possible answers, So for every work, there is an official or unofficial value stream that is followed to produce the delivery from the customer perspective. In this sense, my recommendation will be to start from this value stream. And what is the intention? The intention of the value stream is discovering problem, bottlenecks, impediment of the customers, of the demand crossing the value stream. So for the other hand, if we start with to do, doing, and done, we will lose the ability to see this problem. As a result, we will not solve anything because we will be practical blind, So obviously, okay, this is a point of view from my experience. And most important of all is to start and learn over time and keep simple. If you will start with to do, doing, done, and after that, you will improving your flow and your knowledge about it, the behaviors of the demands crossing the workflow. Okay, let's do it. But if you have a little knowledge of your value stream, start from value stream. This is my position, okay? But obviously, I can understand about Andrea and Nigel as well.
I'll let Andrea go because I've been speaking for too long and bore everybody with my voice. Andrea.
Well, I slightly disagree. Generally, I agree. But obviously, as always in this industry, there needs to be some disagreement, have a good controversial discussion. The to-do doing done, if you just leave it as it is, I find personally is not really adding much value. So yes, you can address one simple point, which is if you limit the work in progress to one per person, at least you don't do lots of multitasking. So it might be like a step forward compared to what you've done before, or what they have done before. However, it's not really giving you any insights, because the key thing is to optimize your process, not just like a task. You don't even know where to start if you just have a task on your list. You don't know often what the priorities are. So there's so many downsides. I do believe that there are certain scenarios, and it's especially when it comes to new product development, when you have the necessity or when you don't have the ability to have a left to right sequential process. So there might be a certain application of the to-do doing done, but even then I would break it down further, I guess, not in the way that Nigel so nicely showed, with like 10 different swim lanes for each of the different priorities or non-priorities for that matter. But generally, I agree with you. I would also start, if there's a process, start with a process. And if it's not on a low level understood, either try to map it together with the team or at least go one level higher. So
I have an opinion.
Of course.
To do and doing done has value from a point of view. You can see what you're working on, what you've got in the queue, and somebody cares about what's in the done column. But it doesn't tell you anything about how you do what you do. So, and I'm going to give you a couple of tips that I've done, and I haven't got time to show you the visuals, of course. But one thing we do is when I go into organizations, we'll do value stream mapping. I'm a big proponent of being able to see how we do what we do, which in value stream mapping is one of the techniques we'll use for that. And indeed, value stream design, which is what you do with the mapping when you've done it to figure out how to make the thing better. And then I'll get some, some tool like Jira, or a much better tool I've become to learn, of Kanbanize. And I will then, see what I did there? So, but no, truly, Jira's, use Kanbanize. So,
can't take it back.
For lots of reasons everybody will agree with me about. You can see, look, the emoticons are going up the screen already. But I basically create a column for every step in the process. And I've had Kanban boards that have been 40 columns wide. And every single step in the process, I put a queue or a waiting column before that step in the process. Guess what happens then? You very quickly make visible where the challenges are, where the bottlenecks are, the constraints are in the system flow, and you can start making you can do some focused improvement work to optimize that flow. Now, it takes a brave person to do that, and not everybody, and I know before this session, Andrea was talking, it's not always easy to map the entire value stream to end, especially in a very large, complicated company where you only control a part of the value stream. But start there, map that. And at least when it comes into you, your bit is as good as it can be, and you understand how work gets done, and start making the queues visible, because there's nothing more powerful than having a conversation with people who control the budgets for resources than showing them the queues and saying, that's the problem, I need to reduce this queue. And then you can have a constructive conversation about reducing the queue. So that's where Kanban as a visualization tool becomes very powerful. It's not its primary purpose as a pull production, but it is a very powerful tool in making the work visible. Veronica.
Thank you. This is how you pass the mic to me, right? I'm not missing the obvious mark. All right. Thank you. Moving on to our next question. How has lean management benefited your organization instances when lean management did not work?
I think, Andrea, you could take that because you've got a lot of experience in that one. I mean, I can talk, but I mean, I think you've got some fantastic stories you were telling us about that.
Well, here I am, I feel proud when I know like the names and what they stand for, and he's getting Christmas cards from everyone. So, and he's referring to me. Well, thank you. Let me try. Where has it been, like, how has it benefited the organization? The first part of the question. So, first I need to say that we have, or the question first, I guess, is what do we refer to as lean? So as we just learned, there are not only certain concepts behind it, but also lots of different definitions out there. So while we think we do lean in many different areas, it will probably just be like a visualization of process in many of them. However, the first project that we have started off, and I tried to make the story short, although it's a lengthy story, obviously. The first project that we had done was, in Rolls-Royce, I mean, was a black bed project where we had a co-located, dedicated flow line. It was a small team of, I think, 15 people, 10, 15 people. And for the first time, they really felt responsible for one process. There was a proper flow. We became predictable, reliable. We could make commitments. We had an understanding of where our issues are. We could address them really quickly. We had a cross-skill collaboration, which was very high because we all sat in the same room. There were so many advantages to it. And one of those flow lines still exists up to today, and it has achieved a better result than any other process that we have. And we have similar processes in different locations. So we have the same process in RD where we practice it, and also in UK. And the difference is that we produce something, the same document in 90 days. I don't want to talk bad about anyone, but the UK, our flagship, produces it in about between 1 and 5 years. So that's how, like how it differs. So generally, I think like when applying it properly, it does have a huge potential. And the problem is though that it's very difficult to always apply it. And I think that's also like part of the question, which I want to like just briefly touch on. So lean management, obviously, yeah, that's also a statement from Ilya. It makes assumptions. So the first assumption is it should be a sequential process. It should be ideally a repetitive process. And I say ideally, Nigel probably thinks like, why is that word in there? So it needs to be. So there are certain environment requirements wherein lean could be applied. Now, our challenge especially is we have a high level of specialization, and we cannot justify dedicated resources on particular process steps, on particular processes. So we keep having shared resources, and that's like our biggest limitation, I would say, that we always pull from different areas. So even if we would, let's say in our process one, limit the work in progress, doesn't mean that they are, the bottleneck is not overloaded still. They would just get work from all the other areas at the same time. So there are more than one limitations, but I want to keep it not keep it short. That's already missed, but not make it too long.
So I'd want to jump in if I may, because there's some of the things you described which is really important. And one recommendation, for people to look at the book Team Topologies, TOPO Topologies, because Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace have written a great book there, which gives some suggestions around where we've got specialized teams, especially in knowledge work, especially in software development and that type of work, and where you've got embedded electronics and embedded systems where certain things work on a different cadence than they would in the software world. So Team Topology is a good book to look at because that gives you some strategies around managing specialized teams and how you organize your people in the teams. The other thing is Kanban is brilliant for exactly what Andrea was describing, because it makes the work visible. You start to see where those system constraints are, those bottlenecks, where those specialized skills are in short supply and limiting your flow of value, your flow of work. So it's extremely powerful in doing that. So I would definitely use it for that. The other thing I would mention to you as well is that have a look at the Toyota Prius case study. I did publish it on LinkedIn once, so you can probably find it back in one of my posts, but maybe I'll post it again. But the Toyota Prius case study, there's some books written on it, and I did a visual version of it. That was one of those examples of where they took a 4 to 5 year lead time to develop a new car. And I'm talking about a new car from scratch, not a new version of a car, but a new car that had never been built, and delivered it in 15 months. And if you look at the case study, you'll see all the TPSE lean type things in there, but you'll see and things like using a big room, an obeyer, and things of this nature, these words that you may have heard. But also a lot of the things they did were very distinctly agile. So it's a really good case study to dig into and have a read about and understand that. And Professor Nanaka, one of the Japanese gentlemen I showed you in a photo earlier, he wrote a whole case study on that. So you can actually do some searching for that and find that out there. And the one other thing I want to say is, because people talk about lean and TPS as, you know, totally different things, and people from the TPS purist world decry lean. So I talk about lean thinking, not because it was on the title of a book, but because I think in a lean way. And the word lean and the concept of lean thinking even predates Toyota. If you go back in the history books, I've just written a brief history of lean thinking for my next book. And I talk about how it goes way back, Frederick Winslow Taylor, even beyond that, and starting to see where some of these thinking things came forward. One of the chat comments, I just want to pull in while I can. Keith Howes made a comment earlier about that building the right product and building the product right sounds like optimizing the order sequence and schedule for production. That's a very lean view, and it's not an incorrect view from a lean point of view, but from an agile point of view, building the right product is building the product your customer wants, not the time in which you build it. So making sure the features, the functions, the capabilities are right, that's the right product. Building the product right is building in the quality. That's the Toyota's principles of Jidoka, just in time, and things of that nature. So I just wanted to clarify that, what I meant by that. Erasto, have you got any comments on implementation of lean and where it's beneficial?
Yes, actually, we used to say lean is made by people, you know. If people are not engaged, don't have the knowledge enough to handle the demands of value creation, don't have a visual system to identify the problem, the system could fail. But this is not because the process, not because the method that is used, is because the people is not prepared to embrace this opportunity to grow up and be the works from the better way, you know. So for me, when fails, is because it's related with the people related to these processes, you know.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna take it away and move us along to the next question. if everyone is okay with that. The next question concerns dealing with inherently high variance or unpredictable processes, either due to internal or external factors. We have an example. A current client, tremendous variance in content, relatively high unpredictability of external dependencies, and the strong seasonality.
This, I don't know whether I should start this or pass it along. This is a really good one. So one of the things I've been talking about a lot recently, and I've been writing some material for the book as well, is about variation and utilization. So variation is the enemy of utilization. And if you look at things like Little's law, the Kingman equation, there's some math out there that blows my mind. It's too hard to understand. But there's a bunch of math out there that says as you increase variety, you increase utilization. But as you increase utilization, you increase work in process, which is defined as the queue, the waiting time. So therefore, you want to reduce variation. One of the key concepts behind lean thinking is leveling, reducing that sort of variation in the flow so we can get continuous flow and we can actually get maximum or most beneficial use of our resources. The problem is that limited variation is the enemy of agility. So if you want to offer lots of different products and services and lots of variations on a theme, or you're working in a world that's very unpredictable, help desk support is a good example of that, customer service, then you're going to have variety as part of the characteristic of the work. So we want huge variety to offer huge choice or be able to be very adaptable and be able to be very agile. So it's a balance. You're constantly having to balance the amount of variety you give. And there's techniques. I mean, I've written a lot about these techniques, but there's things, for simple things like reusability. How many of the things that you've made can you reuse in a different context, which saves you having to reinvent, redesign, remake, rebuild a bespoke version? That's a very Toyota sort of way of thinking there. But variation and utilization, they are bed partners, and you have to balance the two of them. If the utilization goes up to a certain point, the queues theoretically become infinite. So the WIP becomes infinite. You never clear it. And therefore, but if you over optimize or overdrive your resources, then you start getting into the same trap as well. If you overuse those resources, then you get into the same problem with infinite queue length. Whereas if you want to reduce utilization, you have to reduce variation. I'm going to leave that comment there and see what my colleagues have to add on that before I add anything else. Whoever wants to pick that up.
Erasto, feel free to go first.
I think only to complement the point of view of Nigel, okay, and I agree totally, okay. I think one of the biggest mistakes of the organization is not staging what they expected behavior pattern of the demand, you know. They don't have, oh, this is okay, this is correct, this is expected, this is not, okay. So if we have an expected behavior pattern, we can obviously easily see the variation and consider whether it's within the expected behavior or not. And if not, then we are facing a problem. And if we are facing a problem, we will invest effort in solving it. And this is why the variation in some scenarios happens, because you don't know if really is the expected or not, you know?
I mean, I can give a couple of tips. Let me give you a couple of tips. I'm just scanning at something I wrote. So there's some tips to reduce this problem. Standardized work. So standardize the way you do work, which is known as standard work in Toyota in the lean world. Standardized repeatable process. That will help you do little of that. Standardize or simplify products. Try and remove variation. There's different techniques to eliminate some of the variation in the ways you offer different choices. You want to maintain a variety of choice, but you want to limit the number of options that creates for you internally to offer those choices. To do that, you can, I mean, there are things like set-based design or set-based concurrent engineering. That's a thing that came out of the Toyota world. It was used to great effect on the Prius, where you can transfer variation in from the production side into the design side. So you can do multiple threads of design work to make final decisions later in the design process before locking in costs to produce. So you actually take the variation hit at the beginning, not in the mass production or the mass manufacturing. If that's appropriate in your context, you may not be in mass production of something, but you have to balance these different aspects of how much variety you offer if you have a certain amount of resource utilization available. Andrea, you've worked in manufacturing, so you've seen this every day. What's your thoughts?
I'm actually, like, when I'm reading that, I'm thinking more about the knowledge road and the engineering side. So like for me, there are two different scenarios, and I'm just wondering which one was referred to be honest. Because one, it would be where one type of work that follows a certain process is just more complicated. So it takes more time to assess. So therefore the turn or the, depending on what term you want to use, the cycle time, let's say, to use a proper word, varies a lot. And also with that, obviously, the process steps time. The other scenario would be a new product development where you don't really know, like, how many iterations are you going to have. You're going to go back and forth, and you have to make an assumption, you pass that on, a test is made, assumption is invalid, you have to go again, and so on. So while I completely agree with what you said when it comes to the process approach. So the first one I mentioned, there we also then try to differentiate and put separate resource groups on the different topics. So that we have still a flow, and that's where the swim lanes come back, Nigel. So there we would have a flow for the standard items and one for the complex items, so that the complex items doesn't have, no, the other way around. The standard item doesn't have to wait for a complex item to be finished. The other scenario, though, there we would go with what we call like agile, scaled agile, or tiered visual performance management, as Keith would say, approach, where we don't have processes, we have milestones, and those milestones are in a certain cadence broken down into deliverables and tasks. Now, if I then assess a task and I find out, okay, for this one, I have this much effort, for this one, I have this much effort, we break it down to a level that is predefined. So it shouldn't be less than, let's say, half a day, because we don't want to create more cards or to spend time on creating cards and doing the work. But it should also not be more than, and depends on the area, let's say 1 week or 3 weeks. So usually it's shorter time frames. So bigger pieces of work are then broken down. And with that, we become also more predictable, and we know also what we can commit, and how the different interfaces, whether the interfaces can rely on us delivering a certain deliverable in a certain time frame.
I think what you've just described is a lot of techniques for leveling workflow, which is and to balance the workflow among. Just to point on swim lanes aren't evil as long as the one team isn't working on all 4 swim lanes. That's when they become evil. Yes. Because which do I pull from? If each swim lane is a different thread of work with different people pulling from it, not a problem. If it's multiple swim lanes just to sort of visualize the work, but now we've got the team trying to decide which swim lane to pull from, and people are voting for swim lanes, that's a bad thing. Veronica, I know time is shorter, so yes. I want to hand back to you.
Okay, before I move on with the next question, I see that there's some activity in the chat. If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A, not in the chat, and please upvote your favorite questions. There's 51 questions currently. We cannot get through all of them. So if you want to have a question answered, make sure you upvoted. Next question. Can you expand what you mean when you said that we can't use Kanban in a complex environment? You said it was because it is best for a predictive environment, but then what do we use within a complex environment?
Oh, go on. And no, Andrea, go for it.
First, okay, so I think the first thing we have to clarify is when Nigel says Kanban, he means something different than when I use Kanban. So
maybe we need to make sure that we differentiate those two in that case.
Yeah, so that's why I just want to quickly describe where the difference comes from. So coming from the Toyota production system, that is an essential part of it. And as you mentioned earlier, it's a system of replenishment. It is a visual signal, but it's a system of replenishment connected to it. For me, having used Kanban, the tool Kanban, in so many different ways, and all the way from really good to completely, against what the inventor intended for it. For me, it is, to start with, a tool. So it is the visual signal itself. And then you have different, whatever you want to call it, systems, methodologies, frameworks that you can apply on top of that. So generally, I believe I'm like the Kanban lady in my organization. So I believe Kanban can be applied anywhere, for anything. So there's no limitation, and it will always bring you a step forward, regardless of what the environment is. Now, what you apply on top of that, so the framework, the methodology, that I think differs from one way to another. It has limitations. It doesn't mean that the principles cannot be applied. So the concept is more or less the same. The question is only how can you apply those concepts? And when it comes to Lean, I'm not saying that it's like let's say how did you say earlier, the wheel of death. So I guess I picked that up, even though it was in a different context. I'm not saying that if you have shared resources, it cannot be achieved, but you then need a bit of a hybrid model of how you can still balance that out. And that more holistic approach is challenging, but it's possible, I would believe. I'm still trying to find proper ways of standardizing it and making it more simple and achieving all that. But generally, I believe it is possible. It just takes more consideration in certain aspects. And I'm looking forward to read the book that Nigel recommended, hoping to get some tips there.
So I'm going to throw out things, and I've seen my friend John Coleman in the chat talking about complexity. So do look out for that. That's something coming from the Kanban, the professional Scrum with Kanban folks, talking about how to weave complexity thinking into Kanban. So, and I want to agree with Daniel Casper when he says, the visualization is there. And I think that's the 100% thing I would 100% support. Kanban as a visualization capability is absolutely paramount and needed, and works anywhere to help you visualize where things are. We even use Kanban in the pantry at home. I use Kanban in the shower. Now, I don't have a board with post-it notes, But my soap in the shower, I'm going to tell you, my soap in the shower, I have a brand new bar of soap and it's plastic wrapper in the shower, because when I deplete my supply of shower and I'm in the shower and I go, damn, I've got to get out of the shower. I don't, I've got supply. And when I pull that and unwrap it, I toss the wrapper over the shower so it's on the floor. So when I go out, that's my signal to pull a new bar from my inventory and replenish the shower. So Kanban exists everywhere, folks, from that point of view, that practical point of view. And from a visual control point of view, it's absolutely incredibly valuable. What I do talk about, I'm looking at my wife and I use Kanban. We have a swim lane for each of us. Bless you. What a happy marriage. But basically, when we talk about visualization versus the metrics, the problem I have in complex work is people are doing completely unpredictable work, because by definition, complex work is unpredictable, it's unordered, it's non-linear. Yet they're applying metrics which are designed, and their purpose and fitness for purpose is in the linear, ordered, predictable world. Cycle time, folks, is how long does it take me if I pick up this component from an Apple power supply? The cycle time is how long does it take me to make one of those. Now, my predictability comes from, what if I want 1,000 of those? I can now give a predictable, reliable forecast to deliver 1,000. However, if I pull up a user story on a Post-it note, and this is completely different and highly variable compared to all the other user stories in my backlog, how do I give a predictable cycle time for that particular item? Because the cycle time is highly variable. This is when you start to use measures like throughput. How many user stories on average can you deliver in a certain period of time, which then takes away the individual complexities or the size of those items in there. But even that then starts to get people pushed to make user stories of exactly the same size, which is where Dan Bacanti and the No Estimates, sorry, not Dan Bacanti, is in something completely different, apologies to Dan, but where the folks from the No Estimates crowd come in and want everything roughly the same sort of size. Now, my argument is you're still forecasting, you're still counting, you're still estimating. But the problem is, if you're using lean metrics in unpredictable work, they are not reliable. You need to use different measures in an unpredictable world. I don't know if I answered that well enough. I'll look at the comments in a moment. Veronica, or I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If harmony is a big thing in Japanese culture, how does that work with innovation?
Well, actually exists. I remember that exists a word for this in Toyota. I don't know if Nigel is aware of that. Kakushin. Kakushin means innovative improvement. Okay, and seeks to bring better ways of doing what we to do today, achieving better results, but in different ways. And if we think about harmony, would be the balance between what needs to be done and the skill I have to do them. So for me, Kakushin is the best word to represent this one from the Toyota production system perspective. But I like to hear Nigel in this one.
Just repeat the question again, how it was worded, Veronica, because I don't have it open on my screen.
Yeah, no problem. The question is, if harmony is a big thing in Japanese culture, how does that work with innovation?
So I'm trying to find the struggle between the two. I'm not sure that harmony, you can't have harmony within innovation. Now, I mean, from my point of view, innovation comes from trying, well, there's two things, there's innovation and invention. Invention is creating something for the first time ever. Innovation is improving something appreciably by the, whatever notion or whatever approaches and tools, techniques you might use. So for me, I'm trying Navin's put in the chat, harmony is the precondition for innovation. I think that the words that have been used in the modern lexicon now, like psychological safety, safe to fail experiments, these are sort of words that are coming in which might lean towards what's probably being inferred by harmony. And I'm just guessing because I mean, my colleague John Turner, who's listening in, is saying innovation drives harmony, the constant pursuit of perfection or harmony. Now, I mean, Lexus call it the pursuit of perfection is their tagline anyway. Yeah. But for me, when I talk, people talk about culture a lot, and I sort of see harmony and culture in the same category. But for me, culture is the product of our behaviors. So it's how we behave towards each other and towards the work. Culture emerges, you can't impose culture. And I've often talked about Lean having no tools. I often make the statement, Lean has no tools, only behaviors. Now, there's techniques out there, I grant you, but if you talk about Genshin Genbutsu, going to Gemba, this type of thing, respect for people, they're behaviors, they're not tools. Okay, and so this is where we start to find that when you're in Toyota, and I have to be careful how I describe this on public forums, but it is, you know, like it is like a religion. It's not got all the challenging aspects of a religion, but it is like a religion. And you're gently indoctrinated. I don't mean that in a bad way. You are gently introduced to the philosophy of the company, the philosophy of how the founders and the family members and everybody who's come after them have really wanted this organization to evolve. So that forms or formulates your individual mindset. Mindsets are individual. That's our personal worldview. You can't impose a mindset on people, but they set a philosophy, a direction, a North Star, whatever you want to call it. And then they create the environment in which you can be innovative, creative. You can implement Kaizen ways of working, Kaizen ways of thinking. And that enables that to happen. But I think that if you go into an organization that's very command and control, very driven on deadlines, metrics, money, deliverables, milestones, targets, shareholders, OKRs, KPIs, then you've created a certain type of environment. And from that, you'll get certain behaviors. If you want an environment which has got more innovation, more creativity, you need to create an environment to facilitate an environment which enables different behaviors. And the Prius case study is another example. First major popular use of the Obeya, the big room. Not a war room, that's a different thing. But the Obeya itself was an environment where everybody could collaborate together, work together, everything they needed was there. It facilitated inquiry. It facilitated, disagreement, critical thinking. It facilitated invention, ideas, experiments, innovation. And that's the principle behind a lot of the teaching from the Scrum and the Agile world. But it's down to the organization to create the environment and facilitate the environment for that culture to emerge, which will include innovation and creativity. And innovation and creativity comes from teamwork, not from a framework.
Shall we move on? All right. The next question. How can I limit work in progress when my sprints are made up of both projects and unplanned production support tickets?
I'm going to use a word buffer here, and that will send everybody into reels of horror because buffer has a whole lot of different meanings in this world. There is a process Jeff Sutherland taught me years ago, and I've retaught it for years, called the buffer interrupt process. You basically, and in simple language, it's reserving a capacity, a portion of your capacity. You got 100% capacity. You can do some, empirical measurements over time. What's the average amount of capacity that's consumed with support work or interruptions of some description? And then you can reserve that capacity in each iteration, each sprint, each period of work. And then as those interruptions come in, you've got the capacity to work on them. There's still some context switching waste, but you've got the capacity to switch into those to actually deliver those things and consume the buffer. 2 rules. The buffer can never overflow, because if it does, you're now impacting planned work. And number 2, you want a damn good product owner or somebody playing that role of intake manager that ensures that the buffer is only used for things that the buffer needs to be used for. So they're triaging the requests and saying, can this be wait till the next iteration, the next sprint, and it become planned work? Or is it really so important we have now to interrupt the team and consume this reservation of capacity? Others may have different tools and tips. Andrea.
I completely agree. I would just take a step towards the the practical approach to it. So the theory was just, well explained, no surprise. But when it comes to using Kanban, since that's also a Kanban conference, and I assume that the majority here is using Kanban, the way we're doing it is, at least, for those, what I earlier mentioned, the scaled agile, we as Nigel just explained, we have a certain WIP limit, and the WIP limit represents, in our case, 80% of the available capacity. And on top of that, we just place a ticket in every sprint that is reserved for ad hoc work. And we do that in areas where we know it's coming and we know it takes a certain amount of time. So when we do the same, by the way, if we go on vacation. So I have a certain limit in my sprint. So if I go on vacation, I place a ticket, Andrea's gone, 2 days, have fun. And that automatically reduces the amount of work that can be planned for that time frame. So I can highly recommend, I know Dimitar might slightly disagree with that approach, but I can highly recommend the ticket approach and the WIP limits and the sprint backlog.
The important point Dimi was making in the chat is that just stop using sprints, because if you're in control of flow, then it's just a prioritization conversation, yeah. But if you're using the reality is in fixed deadlines, fixed milestones, where you've got to have something burning down to some fixed delivery, there has to be trade-offs there. But yeah, I'm with him. I'd just stop using sprints, but that's just because, you know, I'm a guy like that. So Veronica, sorry.
Erasto, would you like to add on anything?
Everything was said.
Everything was said.
Yeah.
Since we did mention Kanbanize, I'm going to gently segue into our chat where I am posting a link. So if you do want to try Kanbanize and you do want to try a work process without sprints, yeah, it's right there. So there's a link. We're gifting you 2 free months. So that's that. Next question. Why do you think so few managers around the world know about Little's Law, the theory of constraints, and pull systems?
I really want to give this to, I know, stop it.
You,
this is awful. So Little's Law really sucks. And it took me years to understand it because it uses weird symbols like the lambda symbol. Why they can't use letters like the rest of us, I don't know. But the other thing is I'm just reading what people are writing in the chat. The other thing is that it really is head scratching, and the relationship between the entry and exit, you know, the arrival rate of people into the queue, because it's all based around queuing theory and how fast people are arriving into the queue, how fast people can process the people in the queue, whatever they're doing. I have a slide I use, which is people serving coffee, because, you know, it's the easiest one, the Starbucks type example. But I actually had to visualize it and work through it visually and create examples of it so I understood it. And that's because I really suck at math, truly suck at math. It's one of the biggest regrets of mine from my school days of not really focusing on math. I hated my math teacher, which probably was the reason, but I had to really study it to understand it. And I think therein lies the answer to the problem, is that unless you can present it in a way that's really easy to consume by the receiver of the knowledge, and unless they have a PhD or a degree in maths, it's going to be really hard for them to understand. And that's where, when I tell people put the WIP limits in the queue, not in the process step, people look at me like I've got 3 heads. But when you understand Little's Law, you understand why you have to limit the queue. And there's a certain amount you can do to speed up, improve the process, but these things are all related to each other. I have posted the slide a few times. I'll find a way to reshare that with this audience afterwards because it helps. But I built an exercise, which I work with some really clever people on, that I use in my teaching, which puts people through an exercise, teaches them what it is, how to use it, and then they use it to determine the average lead time in the queue for people waiting to order pizza. So if you get it into those sort of, coffee barista, Starbucks pizza ordering type terms and visualize it so they can step through it logically, then they understand it. But it's a law, it's a mathematical law. It's been around since the 60s from John Little, that's his name, from MIT. And that means it's true, unless you can prove it's not true. Andrea, Erasto, care to add?
Yeah, well, I can't argue with that, obviously.
You said everything.
Yeah, it has me around, so it's true. I would just
Next
add
time we're gonna start with you guys. I'm gonna let Nigel go last then.
No, that's totally fine for me. So, because we can then just add a little aspect and don't have to go to the whole topic because he nicely explains it up front. I'll just add like a small thing to it. From my experience, I would say it's not that they don't understand it or they haven't heard about it. It's counterintuitive. And so usually it's like the sooner I start, the sooner I get done. And that's the paradigm that has to be challenged. And Little's Law nicely did so. And I think even if it's understood, and as you say, like we have that in at the airport, we have it in restaurants and so on. So we do see it and we have it in our everyday life and it makes our life better. However, when you then tell it to a manager, it says, yes, I understand the concept, but in our case, it's different. It doesn't apply to our field because. So I think like those exceptions and the challenge of finding a simple way of how to apply it without making a whole science out of it and calculating like 5 years before you come up with an example that doesn't work. I think that is really the challenge. But like the book, The Goal, for example, is widely spread. So I don't think the lack of knowledge is a problem. I think taking on that journey and not make it a big mission, but just get started is the solution. Erasto.
I will pick the next one.
Right.
The next one, you're taking the next one. Let's see what the next one is.
I don't blame him. I just wanted to call out that Dimitar is talking about Dan Vacanti. I did call him out earlier on by mistake at the wrong thing. But if you look at some of Dan Vacanti's maths as well, and some of the stuff he's done with professional Scrum with Kanban, that gives you some alternative ways to view the world. I will tell you that I still don't understand Monte Carlo simulation either. And that's one of the things that Dan introduced to Kanban. And I'm like, I'll do it this way instead. But that's just my lack of understanding. It doesn't mean it's a bad system. So, but yeah, take a look at some of the other techniques that people are doing. But remember, Little's Law is a law. And if you can prove it's not correct, you'll be famous and maybe rich. Veronica.
Tempting. All right. If you need help with Monte Carlos, I would say speak to Dimitar. He can really help you out with those. Okay. We are getting close, guys. So potentially our last question. So we'll make it good. And Erasto is going first. We know that.
Yes.
What would you say are the most effective TPS, a Toyota production system, principles or practices that can be applied in knowledge work?
Okay. The most effective principle is value. You need to most create value from the customer perspective. But I must insist on the idea of eliminating waste, okay? And this will be possible if we have the ability to have mechanisms that allow to see these problems with one intention, solving them, So in this sense, my recommendation will be the value stream mapping, okay? Which has an enormous capacity to these wastes and extract metrics that will allow us to have better understanding of the demand growth in the value stream. So for me, the best technique used in the Toyota production system is value stream mapping, okay? This is a big capacity to understand all the flow, to understand the behaviors of the demands crossing the flow, and we extract a lot of problems that you can resolve. And this way, get a better quality, better performance, reduce costs, etc. But because this is a Toyota production system, I would like to understand the Nigel points of view on this topic as well.
I don't know, let Andrea answer that first. Well, Andrea, okay. Then you can finish with me and I'll say something remotely Toyota-ish. But I mean, it's interesting because when you read the Toyota way, it doesn't actually list a list of principles, which is interesting. But Andrea.
Yeah, I'll let you have the last word on that one, since it's obviously your topic. For me, like as much as I know about it, and as much as we're doing it in our world, it's actually, as Nigel earlier said, the culture, the behaviors. So Kaizen, for example, like just bringing people together, valuing their opinion, finding solutions together, having a team spirit, respecting each other. I think for me, that's like the biggest facet of that whole methodology approach. What is the word? Of the Toyota production system. I would say that's at least what's most valuable for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, you did hit the nail on the head. It's all about people. And that's the thing that a lot of people, no pun intended, forget, that TPS is all about people. Now, it was born out of necessity. They needed to compete with the West. They didn't have the money. They didn't have the materials. If you read a lot of the books, it's fascinating. I've been to the Toyota museums in Nagoya and in other places in Japan. And you actually, see examples of where they would beat metal panels out in the ground. They would make molds in the earth and beat the panels by hand because they didn't have the machinery, because they couldn't afford to buy the machines. So, of course, the whole concept of eliminating waste or eliminating activity that doesn't add value to the product or service was born out of necessity. There's a lot of mystique around TPS. TPS predominantly is a production system. The clue's in the word. So there's a whole bunch of other things that happen around TPS that isn't inherently TPS. The Toyota Way is a philosophy. It's described in the original document as a philosophy. Of course, there are key things. Customer first is the founding principle of the actual company, let alone reiterated throughout the Toyota Way and supplements thereof. And the concept of value delivery, my own work in flow, is all about the flow of value. But value is only valued if your value is valued. So you've got to remember your value is only valuable if your value is valued, which means that the person that values your value is the person who tells you whether it's valuable. So if you don't talk to your customer, it doesn't matter how great and wonderful you think you are. If they don't, you have no remember Nokia, Kodak, people like that. The reason for your existence disappears. You have no value, no matter how great or efficient you are. So being super duper efficient is not enough. You can efficiently create waste, or as my friend Dirk says, uselessly getting tired. So there's some of things of that nature. So focus on value and customer, of course. The three dimensions or three areas that Toyota focused on are cost, quality, and delivery. So the lowest possible cost in the shortest possible lead time and the highest possible quality is the watchword for there. The other thing, and this is a real problem in a lot of organizations where you work, especially in these fast-moving digital industries, where executives are in roles for 2 or 3 years and rotate for higher, better paid positions or leave the company, is the long-term philosophy. You read Jeff Leiker's book, Principle 1 is long-term philosophy. And most managers, most executives in Toyota have been there 20, 25, even 30 plus years. I mentioned Shingo-san have been there for 40 years. They started by doing the simplest of activities and have learned all the different parts of the business all the way through. So the decisions they're making are the right decisions, but it gives them this long-term philosophy, not short-term. You can make money really quickly in the short term, but maybe not ethically and maybe not in the best support of your customers' values and principles. The long-term philosophy is harder to adapt. And that's why a lot of when we go in there as change agents into organizations implementing change initiatives, be they agile, lean, Kanban, whatever words we throw around there, is that the organizations want rapid results, rapid change right now because they're looking for something now to solve a problem. And this type of thinking isn't a tactical solution. It's a strategic tool. It's a strategic way of thinking. Lean is long-term thinking. It's not short-term thinking. And agile really needs to be long-term thinking, not short-term thinking. But they're buying it for the wrong reason. They're buying a framework to solve a problem they don't actually understand. And to paraphrase what John Shook said in the past and what I've said is, what problem do you think you're trying to solve? First understand the problem and then choose tools and techniques, methods and approaches to help you solve the problem. And as Erasto says, value stream mapping helps you to at least make the problem visible. Scrum does that. Ken Schwaber, and I'll paraphrase really badly, I apologize to Ken if he ever hears this, but he says, Scrum's like your mother-in-law. If you invite her to stay, even though she loves you very much, she'll point out all your faults. So the thing is, you implement a tool like Kanban or Scrum or some other technique, and it very rapidly makes visible all the problems with how you do what you do. The challenge is then, how do you go fix those things? And that's where the long-term philosophy needs to come in. I'm sorry, I took a long time to answer that, Veronica.
That's all right. Honestly, it really breaks my heart to say that we are out of time. But first and foremost, I want to say that this has been absolutely incredible. Panelists, you are awesome. Amazing. What an amazing discussion. I love the controversies. I loved the networking train happening in the chat. I think we've connected with so many of you. Thank you so much. I'm sharing one more time. We have a trial link for you. We have our LinkedIn account where you can follow us. And for many of you who asked, yes, the recording of today's session will be made available to you. Expect an email from us. And Nigel, the question for you is, will you share the resources or the PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do, Veronica, I will make the deck available to you as a PDF for everybody. And I'll also include the Little's Law and the Kingman equation stuff, just to add in those value add pieces. Yeah.
Amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Any final words? And this time I want to get a team group picture, because last time we had one of our panelists run off and I couldn't get my picture. But some final words maybe from each of you.
I just want to say thank you for the honor of being part of that. It was like a very delightful exchange. I really enjoyed it. I'm not just saying that, I truly enjoyed it. I hope it would go on for another few weeks. There's so much more I could learn. And having said that, I think for me, probably, because I mentioned what is the most important from TPS, but actually it's Kanban, because without Kanban, I wouldn't be here. My life would look completely different. And it would be not all as exciting. I think it has so many good aspects. And I'm very grateful to be part of this community. I'm very grateful to have had that conversation with Erasto and you, Nigel. And yeah, I hope it's gonna continue one way or another.
There will be more KanConfs to follow, so make sure you don't miss out. There will be
definitely.
more.
And thank you so much for being part of the panel. It was a real joy.
Okay, my turn. For me, it was a great pleasure to have been part of this panel. Okay, so thank you for the invitation. I learned a lot with Nigel and with Andrea. Okay, seriously. And with the panelists, because the question was strong question, interesting questions, you know, and I'm really glad for this moment, okay? And the last thing that I need to say is that please take a look in the people, okay? Agility, technology, methods is a mean, not the end, okay? So please use Kanban to see all the problems that you have in your workflow, improve them for the people, okay, and for your customers. Thank you for the invitation.
I think they're fantastic thoughts from both of my colleagues on the panel. I learn something every time I come to any of these, and I learned things before the webinar started from my fellow panelists as much as I've learned during it, so I'm always grateful for that. I have two comments, and I shared a little bit of this with Veronica the other day. I hear a lot of talk about people getting different colored belts, you know, black belts and yellow belts and green belts and all that nonsense. So I always refer them to Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid when he was asked what kind of belt do you have, and he says canvas, JCPenney, $3.98. And I would like to share my last anecdote of Toyota. The only belts I ever saw in Toyota were conveyor belts. I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists. Thank you to everybody in the audience who's thrown some fantastic curveballs to us. And thanks for Kanban for organizing this. I think it was a fantastic session. Thank you.
It has been absolutely a pleasure. On behalf of the entire Kanban team, I can say it's been a pleasure to have you. We're looking forward to the next one. So make sure to follow us and chat with us. Good night, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, a restful weekend, and until next time. Bye-bye. Oh, wait, my photo.
Oh, again.
Why do I always do this? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Awesome. Okay, I know you probably were expecting a flashlight, but this is Zoom, so no flashlight here. But I will make sure to share it. It's a beautiful picture. Awesome. All right. Well, that's all, folks.
Thank you all, folks.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Next.